My name is Haley Monroe, and for most of my life, I lived in a house where silence felt louder than any scream. People think quiet families are peaceful, but mine was the kind of quiet that makes you wonder if anyone would notice if you disappeared. For years, I tried to earn a place in my own home, but the truth hit me harder than I expected. The day I walked away, no one called. And that was when I learned the one question that still haunts me. What happens when your family only remembers you when they need something? Growing up, I used to think every family had a rhythm, a natural way of moving together. Mine did too, just not in a way that included me. In our house, people flowed around each other like they were part of a dance I was never invited to join. My mother's attention spun around my older brother Evan, the golden boy of our small town. My father's patience wrapped itself around Chloe, the youngest, the girl whose mistakes were treated like tiny quirks. And me? Well, I existed in the empty spaces between them, the quiet middle note no one bothered to hear. I learned early on that silence had weight. It filled the rooms, settled into my chest, and taught me how to shrink myself to take up as little space as possible. At the dinner table, my mother would lean forward, eyes bright, asking Evan about basketball tryouts, or complimenting Chloe on a drawing she made. I would sit there with a story or a question on the tip of my tongue, waiting for the right moment, waiting for someone to notice. But time would stretch, plates would empty, conversations would shift, and I would swallow whatever words I had saved. Eventually, I stopped trying to speak at all. You can only knock on a locked door so many times before your knuckles start to bleed. Some people say being ignored is easier than being yelled at. I disagree. Yelling at least means someone saw you. Being ignored means you could fade into the floorboards and no one would trip over your absence. That is the kind of quiet I grew up in. I remember one night in particular, a moment that still sits like a small stone beneath my ribs. I was 12, standing at the kitchen counter, cutting strawberries because my mother said she was too busy to make dessert. I worked carefully, wanting to do it right, hoping maybe the small gesture would bring a smile or a thank you. Evan burst into the kitchen, waving a paper in the air. He had made the honor roll, something he had done dozens of times. My mother gasped, pulled him in for a hug, and promised to bake his favorite cookies. I stood there holding the knife, strawberry juice running down my fingers, waiting for someone to remember I was in the room. No one did. I placed the bowl on the table and walked quietly back to my room. As I closed the door, the laughter from the kitchen kept going. It didn't follow me. It never did. Birthdays were the same. Sometimes there was a card, sometimes not. One year, when I turned 14, my mother handed me a wrapped box without looking up from her phone. Inside was a book I already owned. When I told her, she shrugged and said she would return it. She forgot. The book sat on the hallway table for 3 weeks before disappearing. I never asked where it went. At 15, I tried harder. I cleaned the house, cooked dinner, and made straight A's. I told myself that maybe if I worked hard enough, I could earn my place at that table. Maybe they would see me then, but nothing changed. Evan's basketball trophy got a shelf of its own. Chloe's messy paintings earned magnets on the fridge. My report card was set aside without comment. I remember picking it up later from the counter, smoothing the creases with my hand. I wanted someone to be proud of me. I wanted someone to see the girl who tried so hard to matter. By 16, something inside me began to thin out, like fabric worn too many times. I would walk past the living room and see the three of them on the couch, their heads close together as they laughed at some inside joke. I would stand in the doorway for a few seconds before slipping away. No one ever asked where I was going. No one ever asked why I wasn't there to begin with. And it wasn't just the big moments. It was the small ones that cut the deepest. The forgotten goodnights. The unopened bedroom door. The way my father would say good morning to Evan and Chloe with a smile, then glance past me like he was looking through glass. The way my mother would introduce us to neighbors, naming each of her children proudly, then hesitating for half a second before remembering my name. That half second was enough to make something inside me fold in on itself. I began to wonder if maybe I was built out of different material than the rest of them. Maybe I was too quiet, too plain, too easy to forget. I spent hours lying on my bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what I had done wrong. Kids always think things are their fault. And I was no exception. I thought if I could just be better, louder, smarter, prettier, anything, maybe the silence would finally break, but it never did. As I got older, I learned how to move through the house without making a sound. It wasn't intentional at first, but eventually, it became a habit. Step lightly, speak softly. Don't take up space you're not invited to fill. I became so good at disappearing that sometimes even I questioned whether I still lived there. And yet, a part of me held on to hope. Hope is stubborn like that. It curls in your chest, whispering that maybe tomorrow things will change. But tomorrow never came. By the time I reached high school, I understood the truth, even if I didn't want to accept it. In my family, I was the shadow behind brighter lights, the quiet space between louder stories. I wasn't the favorite. I wasn't the baby. I was the placeholder child, the one who filled the gaps but never the frame. And once you finally understand that, there is no going back. As I got older, I kept thinking effort could fix everything, that maybe the problem wasn't them, maybe the problem was me. Maybe I just hadn't tried hard enough to earn a seat in the life I was supposed to belong to. So I doubled down on being the kind of daughter anyone would be proud of. I told myself that if I worked harder, helped more, stayed quieter, did everything right, someone would look up one day and finally see me. Hope made me persistent, even when reality kept proving me wrong. I remember waking up early before school, slipping into the cold kitchen while the rest of the house slept. I would unload the dishwasher, pack my own lunch, and sometimes even pack lunches for Evan and Chloe, just so my mother wouldn't have to rush. She never asked who prepared the food. She simply walked into the kitchen, grabbed the neat containers lined up on the counter, and hurried everyone into the car. I would walk to the bus stop alone, watching their taillights fade down the street. At school, teachers praised my grades, classmates admired my projects, but none of it mattered when I got home. I would place my report card on the kitchen table, hoping someone would notice the A in biology or the perfect score in English. But days would pass before one of them even moved the paper out of the way, usually to make room for Evan's gear or Chloe's art supplies. No congratulations, no questions, not even a glance. Just another thing I learned to pick up quietly and tuck away in my room. By 14, I realized I was becoming fluent in invisibility. I could walk into a room without anyone's eyes drifting toward me. I could speak and watch my words fall straight to the ground. But a small part of me kept pushing, desperate, stubborn. I told myself that the only reason they didn't see me was because I hadn't shined bright enough yet. So I tried harder. I took on more chores. I vacuumed the living room, wiped the counters, folded laundry, organized the closet. I hoped maybe the clean smell in the air or the freshly folded towels would make someone pause and ask, "Did you do all this?" But instead, the house became cleaner and the silence became heavier. One afternoon stands out clearly. The sun had started slipping behind the trees, turning our backyard gold. My mother stood at the stove, stirring pasta sauce for dinner. I approached her with a nervous flutter in my chest, holding a flyer for the school talent showcase. I had been practicing a piano piece for weeks, one I hoped she would come hear. I held the paper out to her, my words soft but hopeful. "Mom, the showcase is next Friday. I would really like it if you came." She glanced at the flyer for less than a second before turning back to the pot. "I'll see if I can make it," she said, the same tone she used when talking about hair appointments or grocery shopping. She didn't ask what I would be performing or if I was nervous. She didn't look at me again. I went to the showcase alone. Evan, meanwhile, never had to ask twice. If he had a game, the whole family went even if he didn't play. If Chloe had a school art fair, my mother would take photos and gush about every finger painting. Watching them celebrate each other felt like pressing my face against a window, looking at warmth I could see but never touch. At times, I wondered if I was adopted, if maybe someone else's child had somehow ended up in their home. How else could I explain being treated like a visitor in a family of 4? Still, I held on. Even the loneliest child can cling to hope with a strength that surprises them. My birthday that year was quiet. Too quiet. No cake, no candle, no off-key singing. My mother claimed the week had been too busy. She said it offhandedly, as if forgetting your child's birthday was something that happened all the time. Evan patted my shoulder once, in the same way you might console someone whose favorite TV show got cancelled. Chloe asked if she could have the last slice of pizza, the one she assumed was hers anyway. I sat at the table afterward, staring at the empty plates, wondering how a day meant to celebrate your life could feel like a confirmation that your presence changed nothing. But even then, I tried. I cleaned up the wrapping paper from Chloe's birthday the following month, helped decorate for Evan's party, and spent hours baking cupcakes because my mother said store-bought ones tasted too artificial. I told myself helping them celebrate would remind them they forgot me. It didn't. By 17, I had perfected the art of hiding disappointment. I laughed when they forgot to save me a plate. I smiled when no one texted to ask if I got home safely. I held my breath when they talked about future family trips, without once including me. And the worst part was how normal it all felt. I became so used to being invisible that I started doing it to myself. I stopped raising my hand in class. I avoided school dances. I walked through hallways like someone trying not to disturb the air. The truth is, there is a kind of ache that doesn't scream. It simply settles into your bones and teaches you to expect less. That is what those years did to me. They taught me to shrink, to observe, to survive quietly, but deep down, a voice kept whispering that this couldn't be all there was, that maybe somewhere beyond the walls of that house, a different version of my life was waiting. I didn't know it then, but soon I would find out exactly what it felt like to leave that silence behind. And the most painful part wasn't leaving. It was realizing no one reached for me when I walked away. By the time I turned 19, something inside me had stretched so thin it felt ready to tear. The years of trying, the years of hoping, the years of convincing myself that maybe the next day would be different, had worn me down in ways I didn't fully understand yet. But the truth finally arrived on a night that should have meant something. A night that belonged to me, at least on paper. My 19th birthday. It fell on a Thursday. Nothing special, nothing loud, just an ordinary day that I quietly hoped might be different from all the rest. I woke up early, not because I was excited, but because birthdays have a way of stirring something fragile inside you. I stood in front of the mirror, a little longer than usual, wondering if I looked any older, any wiser, any more deserving of being noticed. Downstairs, the house was its usual blur of motion. Evan rushed out the door with a gym bag slung over his shoulder. Chloe complained she couldn't find her jacket. My mother pressed travel mugs into their hands, reminding them of schedules, rehearsals, homework. No one looked at me, no one paused, no one remembered. I told myself to be patient. They might say something later. The day dragged on. At school, my friends signed my notebook with quick messages and sloppy hearts. Someone bought me a cookie from the cafeteria. A girl in my English class hugged me. It was small, but it warmed me in a way I wasn't used to. I held on to that warmth as I walked home. The sun had already begun to sink by the time I pushed open the front door. The house smelled like roasted chicken. I heard laughter from the living room. A small burst of hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe they planned something. Maybe the surprise was waiting just beyond that door. But when I stepped closer, the scene unfolded in front of me with painful clarity. Everyone sat around the table eating dinner. Plates full, drinks poured, conversation flowing. No empty seat waiting for me, no candle, no cake, no mention of the date. Chloe was talking about her art project. My father nodded along. Evan was showing them a new highlight video from his basketball game, replaying the same shot twice while my mother clapped proudly. I stood there for almost a full minute before anyone turned to look. "Oh, Haley," my mother said casually. "There is leftover chicken in the oven. Heat it up if you want." Leftover. On my birthday. I nodded, pretending it didn't matter, pretending I was used to it. Maybe I was. I took the cold plate from the oven, warmed it quietly, and ate by myself at the corner of the counter, while my family continued their conversations right over my head. Not once did anyone mention the date. Not once did anyone say the words I had waited all day to hear. Happy birthday. By the time I finished eating, something inside me had gone completely still. Not angry, not sad, just empty in a way that scared me. I walked upstairs to my room. leaving the noise behind, and sat on the edge of my bed. The moonlight through the window landed softly on the floor, making the room look gentler than it felt. For the first time in my life, I let myself ask the question I had been afraid to face. If I left right now, would they notice? I didn't have to think long. I packed slowly, methodically. A few shirts, a pair of jeans, a toothbrush, my wallet, the small amount of money I had saved from working part-time at the bookstore. I folded everything carefully, not because I was sentimental, but because giving attention to my things felt like giving attention to myself. Before leaving, I stood at the door of my room, taking in the familiar shapes, the posters I had taped up, the stack of books by the window, all the things that made this space look like mine. But even there, in the only corner of the world meant to belong to me, I never felt rooted. I never felt chosen. I walked out quietly. No one asked where I was going. Their laughter floated through the hallway as I slipped out the front door and closed it softly behind me. On the sidewalk, the cold night air met my skin like a shock. For a moment, I hesitated, half expecting the door to swing open, someone calling my name, someone noticing I was gone. But nothing happened. The house stayed dark and closed, as if it were swallowing me for the last time. I took a deep breath, tightened my grip on the bag, and walked. There was no dramatic goodbye, no yelling, no slammed door, just the quiet sound of my footsteps fading into the night. And for the first time in my life, that silence felt honest. It told me exactly what I needed to know. I could disappear, and the world inside that house would keep turning without missing a single beat. Later, in the small room I eventually found for rent, I sat on the edge of a thin mattress and checked my phone every few minutes. I waited for a message, a call, a question, even a simple, "Where are you?" But the phone stayed dark. 1 hour passed, then 3, then a week. Their silence was not an accident. It was confirmation. They hadn't lost me. They had simply never looked in my direction to begin with. And that realization, as painful as it was, became the very first step toward the life I was meant to build. If you have ever felt invisible in your own family, comment number 1. You are not alone. The first night in my new room didn't feel like freedom. It felt like fear wearing a thin coat. The apartment was old, with walls that held the smell of dust and leftover winter. The window rattled when the wind hit it. The single overhead bulb hummed, flickering like it wasn't sure it wanted to stay alive, and the mattress creaked every time I shifted my weight. It wasn't home, not yet, but it was the first place I had ever chosen for myself, and that alone made it different from anything I'd known before. I shared the apartment with June, a girl I barely knew. She opened the door wearing paint-stained sweatpants, her hair piled into a messy bun that looked like it was protecting at least 3 pencils. She blinked at me, surprised, but then smiled like she understood something, without needing to hear the story behind it. She showed me the room, handed me a spare key, and said she didn't mind noise but usually forgot to cook, so the fridge would probably look empty most days. I nodded, and she nodded back, and somehow that was enough. 2 strangers choosing not to intrude on each other's ghosts. My job came next. I walked into a small cafe 3 blocks away, one of those places with chipped tables and the faint smell of burnt vanilla syrup that clung to the air no matter how often they cleaned. The owner, Mrs. Ray, was a woman in her 50s with hair cut sharp as her tone. She interviewed me by simply asking if I knew how to carry a cup without dropping it. When I said yes, she tossed me an apron and said, "Good, you start tomorrow." Working at the cafe wasn't glamorous. It was loud during morning rushes, quiet in the afternoon, hectic on weekends. My hands were constantly warm from the steam wand, and I smelled like coffee grounds every night. But there was something comforting in the routine. Customers didn't care who I was related to. They didn't see me as the middle child or the forgettable one. They saw me as the girl who remembered their orders or who could make a latte in under 30 seconds. Every small success mattered here in ways it never had at home. Slowly, I found a rhythm. Wake up, work, come home, study, repeat. It wasn't exciting, but it was mine, and for the first time, silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like a space I could grow into. Community college came after I scraped together enough in savings and financial aid. It wasn't the dream school people bragged about on social media, but the halls were full of people just trying to rebuild their lives. Single parents, laid-off workers, students who had nowhere else to start. No one there cared about perfection. They cared about effort. Maybe that's why I fit in so easily. That's where I met Maddox. I first saw him crouched over a broken printer, like he was performing surgery. He wore glasses that kept sliding down his nose and muttered to himself as he worked. When he finally got the machine working again, he raised his hands like he'd achieved something miraculous. I laughed under my breath, and he glanced up, smiling like he'd just been waiting for someone to appreciate his joke. Maddox became the person I went to when my laptop overheated, when I didn't understand something in computer lab, or when I needed someone who understood the language of quiet people. Then there was Jenna, the girl who ran the campus podcast room and spoke like every sentence was a melody she hadn't finished writing. She talked fast, laughed loud, and always carried 2 bags, one for her equipment and one for snacks. She asked for my help with audio editing one day, and from then on, she treated me like a missing puzzle piece she had finally found. Being around her lifted something in me, the heaviness I had carried for years, loosening a little more each day. And then came Oliver. I noticed him before I ever said a word to him. He worked at the campus library, sorting books with a quiet kind of intention, like every motion mattered. He wasn't loud like Jenna, or distracted like Maddox. He was steady. He had the kind of calm presence that made you feel like the room wasn't spinning quite so fast. When I finally asked him where to find a book for class, he didn't just point. He walked me to the shelf and handed it to me gently, as if giving me something fragile. We talked more after that. Not long conversations, just soft ones, simple ones, but they made me feel something I hadn't felt in years. Seen. Life didn't transform overnight. I still had nights when my chest tightened, when I wondered what my family was doing, when I caught myself hoping for a message I claimed I no longer wanted. Healing wasn't a straight line. It was slow, uneven, and filled with moments where old wounds reopened without warning. But every time June insisted I try a meal she burned, every time Maddox fixed something without being asked, every time Jenna dropped snacks on my desk, every time Oliver looked at me like he truly heard my words, something inside me stitched itself back together. Little by little, I built a life that didn't need their approval. I didn't realize it then, but these people I barely knew were teaching me the shape of real care, the kind that doesn't demand anything in return. They didn't know my past. They just chose me anyway, and for the first time, choosing myself no longer felt impossible. 2 years passed in a strange rhythm of quiet progress. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just the slow and steady shaping of a life that finally felt like it belonged to me. By the time I turned 21, I had finished a 1.5 years of community college, worked almost every day at the cafe, and learned how to breathe without waiting for someone to hurt me. I didn't think about my family as much anymore. Or maybe I did, but in softer ways, like remembering a place I once lived but no longer recognized. I thought their silence was permanent. I thought that chapter of my life had closed with the same sound it had always made, nothing at all. And then, one evening, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in 2 full years. Dead Mobile. At first, I truly believed it was a mistake. My finger hovered over the screen, my breath caught somewhere between my ribs. The call rang until it stopped. I stared at the missed call for a long moment, unsure whether I felt shock, bitterness, fear, or something more complicated. Then came the voicemail. His voice was strangely casual, like no time had passed at all. "Hey, it's Dad. We were wondering how you've been. Mom asked about you. Call us sometime." That was it. No mention of the night I walked out. No acknowledgement of the years without a single message. No apology. Just a tone that suggested I had simply forgotten to stop by for dinner. My hands trembled slightly, though I didn't understand why. I had survived without them. I had rebuilt myself without them. And yet hearing his voice again felt like someone opening a door I had locked for my own safety. I didn't call back. 2 days later, my phone buzzed again. This time, a text. From Evan. "Dad has been trying to reach you. You should talk to him." No question mark. No warmth. Just an obligation disguised as concern. Then Chloe. "Where are you even living now? You need to come home." I stared at her message, a strange sense of déjà vu washing over me. Chloe, the child who had once taken my seat at the table without a thought, now telling me to come back to a place that had never felt like mine. I didn't reply. I left the messages unread until they no longer made my pulse quicken. But the quiet didn't last. They kept coming, dropping in my phone like pebbles thrown against a window. We need to talk. It's important. Call us. No one explained what was so urgent. No one asked how my life had been. No one said they missed me. The words were hollow, thin, like they were reaching for the idea of me, rather than the person I had become. Still, I couldn't deny the way my stomach tightened each time the screen lit up. Old fears have long roots, and mine stretched back to the very childhood I tried so hard to outgrow. One evening, I sat in the library, after a late shift, the smell of old paper calming the churn inside me. That was when Oliver noticed I wasn't fully present. He closed the book he had been sorting and leaned slightly toward me. "You're somewhere else tonight," he said quietly. I hesitated, then let out a breath that felt heavy. My dad called. The look on his face softened. "And how do you feel about that?" I didn't know how to answer. I wanted to say I felt nothing. I wanted to say I was fine. But the truth was more tangled. "Like he's knocking on a door I locked for a reason," I murmured. He nodded slowly. "You don't have to open it just because he knocked." His words rested in my chest long after I left the library. But the next morning, another message arrived. From Dad. "We need 1 hour, please." And for the first time, something inside me shifted. Curiosity, wariness, the need for answers I didn't even know I wanted. Not reconciliation, not forgiveness, just truth. So I replied with 3 simple words. 1 hour. Public. I chose a cafe, halfway between the life I left and the life I built. Neutral ground. A place where neither of us held the advantage. My heart beat faster than I wanted to admit as I walked there, each step feeling like the past pulling against the future. When I sat down at a corner table, my hands felt oddly cold. I watched the door, watched the clock, told myself I was ready, but nothing could have prepared me for the moment my father finally stepped inside. He looked older, smaller, like time had pressed its thumb into him while I was gone, and yet the expression on his face was unsettlingly familiar. It was the same look he used to give me at home, a mixture of distraction and duty. Not love, not regret, just something he had to do, and deep down, I already knew. He hadn't come to reclaim me. He had come because he needed something. My father hesitated at the door before he spotted me. For a moment, his eyes flickered with something I couldn't name. Not relief, not joy. More like the faint recognition you give a person you once knew but can no longer place. He walked over, adjusting the sleeves of his jacket, as if preparing himself for a conversation he didn't want to have. He sat down slowly, clearing his throat as though rehearsing what to say. I waited, hands folded in my lap, grounding myself in the chair beneath me. I had spent 2 years building the strength to sit at this table without shrinking. "Haley, you look good," he said finally. Good, a neutral word, safe, empty. I nodded. I didn't thank him. My silence made him shift in his seat. "So," he continued, clasping his hands, "it's been a while. A while." As if 2 years of absolute disappearance were the same as missing a few family dinners. I watched him avoid my eyes, his gaze drifting to the window, the counter, the floor, anywhere but me. "Why now?" I asked. He blinked. "What? Why reach out after 2 years? What changed?" The question hung in the air like a weight. He exhaled, long and tired, then leaned back as if the truth required distance. "Your grandmother passed away last month," he said finally. "The atmosphere at home has been tense. Everyone is under pressure. We thought maybe it would help if the family came together." There it was. Not my birthday. Not my disappearance. Not the years of silence. A funeral. A missing seat. A family photo that would look incomplete without the daughter they had ignored. I stared at him, feeling my heartbeat slow into something steady and cold. "So you want me there for the sake of appearances?" His jaw tightened. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then rubbed his forehead as though the words refused to align. We just think the family should be whole right now. Whole, a word they never used when I lived under their roof. A word that only mattered now that someone else was gone. I leaned forward just enough for him to meet my eyes. The cafe noise faded around us. I needed you 2 years ago, I said quietly. When I left, no one called. Not that night, not the next day, not ever. His eyes flickered downward. We thought you needed time, he murmured weakly. Time, I repeated. Or space, or distance. Convenient words for people who never really saw me to begin with. He flinched, just slightly. I wasn't trying to wound him. I was stating facts. Facts he had never cared to learn. He shifted again, uncomfortable. Your mother is worried about you, he said. No, she's not, I replied. She's worried about what it will look like if I'm not there. His silence proved I wasn't wrong. For the first time in my life, I felt strangely calm, as if every unanswered question had finally resolved into a single, simple truth. They had never missed me. They needed me now, because someone else was gone. I stood up slowly. The chair made a soft scrape against the floor, but not loud enough to turn heads. My father looked up, startled, like he hadn't expected me to be the one to end the conversation. I'm not coming home, I said. He blinked several times, confusion tightening his features. Haley, don't be dramatic. It's just one day. It was never just one day, I replied. It was years. Years of me trying to matter. Years of being invisible in my own house. Years of silence that you now want to pretend didn't happen. His expression shifted into something sharper, defensive. So that's it. You're still holding on to the past. I felt something inside me harden, not with anger, but with clarity. The past is the only thing any of us ever held. I let go of it. You didn't. He stared at me, searching my face for the girl he once knew. But she wasn't there anymore. She had walked out on her 19th birthday and hadn't returned since. I reached for my bag, placing the strap over my shoulder. As I turned to leave, he spoke again, his voice small. Your mother will be disappointed. For a long moment, I stood still. Then I said the words I had needed to say for half my life. That's not my responsibility anymore. If your family only remembers you when they need something, is it still a family, or just a place you escaped from? Comment your thoughts. I walked away before he could answer, stepping out into the cool air. The sky was gray, and the wind cut across my cheeks, but for the first time, I didn't feel cold. I felt clean, as if something heavy had finally slipped off my shoulders. As I moved down the sidewalk, one thought followed me, steady and sharp. Some families miss the daughter they lost too late, not because they loved her, but because they finally realize they can't replace her. And that is a truth I refuse to carry for them. When I stepped out of the cafe, the air felt different. Sharper, cleaner, as though the world had shifted a few inches in my favor without asking for permission. I stood there for a moment, staring at the gray sky, letting the quiet settle inside me. For so long, silence had meant abandonment. Now, it felt like space. Space to breathe, space to think, space to finally live without carrying a weight that was never mine. The walk home was slow, not because I was tired, but because I didn't want to rush the feeling that wrapped around me. A strange calm, the kind you only earn after walking through fire. Every step felt like a soft goodbye to the girl who once waited by a bedroom door for someone to knock. By the time I reached the apartment building, the hallway light was flickering again, buzzing like it was arguing with itself. But the sound didn't bother me today. It felt familiar in a way that didn't hurt. When I pushed open the door, the warmth hit me first. Someone was cooking. Not well, but cooking. June popped her head out of the kitchen, wearing an apron that said, "Kiss the cook, even if she burns it, grease stains," proving the message was a warning more than a joke. "Hey, you're home early. I made pasta." Or something like pasta. "You want some?" She didn't know where I had been. She didn't know what had happened, but her voice carried something my family's voices never had. Care. I smiled, dropped my bag, and nodded. Yeah, pasta sounds good. While she stirred the pot, music played softly from her phone, a song with no real melody, just slow chords drifting through the room. I sat at the kitchen table, watching her fumble with spices she didn't understand. It made me laugh, quietly, in a way that surprised me. When we sat down to eat, the food was overcooked, the sauce too thick, the flavors confused, but it tasted like a place where I belonged. Later, I met Maddox in the campus lab. He was soldering something that looked suspiciously like a toaster he had taken apart for fun. He glanced up and immediately noticed the shift in me. "You look different," he said. "Lighter, light." A word I had never associated with myself. I told him a little. Not everything. Just enough for him to understand that my past had come knocking, and I hadn't answered the way I used to. He didn't pry. He simply nodded and kept working, occasionally bumping my shoulder with his own in that awkward, comforting way he had. Healing doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it looks like sitting in a computer lab while someone fixes a toaster. A few days later, Jenna dragged me into the podcast room. She had found a new microphone and insisted we test it. Her energy filled the small space, bouncing off the walls in bright waves. "You ever notice," she said, adjusting the stand, "that you talk more now? When I met you, you barely said a sentence. Now you talk like you trust the air around you." I didn't know how to answer, but her observations stayed with me. Maybe I had changed. Maybe choosing myself had rearranged something inside me. But it wasn't until I saw Oliver that I finally understood the depth of that change. We met on the library steps after his shift. He carried 2 cups of tea, handing one to me with the quiet gentleness that had become his language. We sat there watching students pass by, wrapped in winter jackets, the sky slowly losing color. "You met him, didn't you?" he asked softly. I nodded. And I thought my answer would be complicated, that I would unravel, or shake, or break a little. But the words came steady. I told him no. Oliver didn't congratulate me. He didn't praise me. He didn't act like I had won a battle. Instead, he simply looked at me the way a person looks at someone who has finally stepped into the version of themselves they were always meant to become. "I'm proud of you," he said eventually. Something warm spread through my chest, gentle and unexpected. Not the desperate warmth I spent years chasing. This was different. This was earned. That night, back in my room, I sat by the window with the lights off, letting the city glow spill across my floor. The hum of traffic blended with June's laughter from the living room, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to brace for impact. I thought about the 2 silences in my life. The first was the silence that erased me. The second was the silence I had created for myself, a quiet built on boundaries, choices, and small acts of self-respect. This silence didn't suffocate, it healed. I realized then that peace doesn't come from the people who hurt you finally apologizing. Peace comes from no longer needing their apology to move forward. If someone hurts you for years, and then expects you to fix the family, would you go back or walk away? Tell me what you would do. And in that moment, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I had not just left my old life, I had outgrown it. Spring arrived quietly that year, not with bright colors or warm breezes, but with small shifts I didn't notice at first. The mornings felt softer. The air inside the apartment didn't feel so heavy. I started waking up without that familiar tightness in my chest, the one that used to remind me I was carrying too much of yesterday. Healing, I realized, isn't a sudden sunrise. It's the slow drifting of night into morning. I spent more time at the cafe, not because I needed the hours, but because the place had become a kind of anchor. The hiss of the espresso machine, the clinking of cups, the low hum of conversations from people I would never meet twice. I fit there in a way I never fit anywhere else. Mrs. Ray still scolded me for wiping the counters too often, but she also saved the last blueberry muffin for me most mornings without saying a word. Small gestures, but real ones. June painted more often, letting her canvases dry across the living room floor like stepping stones I had to navigate. She talked about dreams of designing houses someday. Houses with windows that let light in no matter where you stood. I listened, smiling, because I finally understood what it felt like to imagine a future instead of fearing one. Maddox convinced me to help with one of his repair projects, something that looked like a lamp but possibly could explode. We didn't fix it, but we laughed more than we worked. Jenna dragged me into recording an episode of her podcast, though I mostly sat in the corner while she talked about second chances and unexpected beginnings. She winked at me afterward, as if she knew those words were aimed at me even if I never said a single one into the microphone. And Oliver. Some evenings, we walked home together from the library, not holding hands, not touching, just walking, the kind of closeness that didn't need proof or labels. There was a steadiness in the way he listened to me, like nothing I said could ever be too small or too heavy. He became the quiet my heart didn't fear. Life wasn't perfect. Old thoughts still crept in on the lonely nights. There were moments when a familiar ache rose without warning, reminding me of birthdays forgotten, dinners eaten alone, conversations where I was present but unseen. But each time the memories surfaced, they felt less like wounds and more like old photographs, painful to look at, but no longer sharp enough to cut. One afternoon, a relative I hadn't spoken to in years sent me a message, a short one. "Heard you've been distant. Family needs unity right now." Once, those words would have unraveled me. Once, I would have cried quietly, wondering why I couldn't be the person they wanted. But this time, I simply read the message, took a breath, and deleted it, not in anger, not in fear, but in understanding. Some doors are meant to stay closed, because some people don't miss you. They miss the version of you who needed them, the version you had to outgrow to survive. As the months passed, the distance between who I had been and who I was becoming grew wider, and for the first time, the distance felt like safety rather than loss. One night, sitting on the fire escape with Oliver beside me, I finally said it out loud. "I used to think their silence defined me," I said. "That if they didn't see me, maybe I wasn't worth being seen." He didn't respond immediately. He didn't rush me. He simply let the moment settle. "But now," I continued, "I think I was always whole. I just needed a place where being whole wasn't treated like a burden." He smiled then, softly, the kind of smile that didn't need words. And in that moment, watching the city lights flicker against the dark, I understood something I had chased my entire life. I was not the daughter who left. I was the woman who found herself. And no one could take that from me. My past didn't disappear. It didn't dissolve. It simply stopped being the thing that shaped every breath I took. The quiet I lived in now wasn't cold like it used to be. It was warm, wide, and open. The kind of quiet you can build a future on. I went inside later that night, closing the window gently behind me. The apartment smelled like paint and pasta sauce and old books. Imperfect things, real things, my things. I didn't know exactly what came next. A degree, a job, a life with people who chose me without conditions. Maybe even a family of my own someday, the kind built on presence instead of performance. But for the first time, the unknown didn't scare me. It felt like possibility. I turned off the last light, listening to the soft murmur of the city outside, and whispered a truth that had taken me 21 years to understand. I didn't walk away from home. I walked toward myself, and that made all the difference. If this story reminds you that peace begins the moment you choose yourself, give this video a like. And if you believe in stories that heal, guide, and help you breathe a little easier, consider subscribing. Sometimes the right story arrives exactly when your heart is ready for it.